Before we delve into some really, really deep and dark kind of sub-chapters of my book, I want to talk to you from the heart. No script, no nothing, just straight from the heart. The next couple of chapters are surrounding domestic violence and my thoughts on domestic violence and how I think we can reduce the numbers of domestic violence in Australia and around the world. Like anyone, I hate the fact that domestic violence is so prevalent in society, but I also believe that the way that our government and the authorities in Australia in particular are going about it, it's not right. There's something wrong there. We've got the whole situation wrong. I believe that there's a way around that. And I hope that people listening to the next couple of chapters will understand that this is coming from the heart. And I sincerely want us to bring an end to domestic violence in Australia and around the world. So please open your mind, suspend your judgment as we go through this next part of the book, and hopefully something in there will trigger an idea for you that will help you to create better relationships in your life. Before we delve deeper into this chapter, I want to start by setting it up with two words: what and if. These two words may not seem special, but if you use them in the right way, they can change your life. I told a story in the No BS approach to create the life you want, where Tony Robbins used these words to flip our thinking around in his Date with Destiny 2016 promotional video on YouTube. Search Date with Destiny 2016 promo on YouTube to see the video I'm referring to. Whenever I watch this video, I get goosebumps and well up with tears of excitement. Please, do yourself a favour, watch this video. Not just once, but as many times as it takes until you too find yourself getting goosebumps and tearing up. Once this happens, you will know that the truest meanings of Tony's words have sunk in. The video is a very powerful 2-minute video and recently got me thinking if I could create something similar to flip the narrative on how people see their lives and their circumstances. The biggest hurdle for people in taking charge of their life is them thinking that they have little control over what happens or what they attract. So here's what I jotted down in the hope that before we dive into some controversial topics, you might be able to see the power of those two words. If you can, then I promise that your life will never be the same again. Open your mind and ask yourself, what if we had the power to create the life we wanted? What if we were responsible for how others treated us? What if we were the only reason we succeeded or failed? What if we somehow attracted everything that has happened in our life? What if we stopped using excuses and stopped blaming others? What if nothing was our fault, but everything was our responsibility? And most importantly, what if all of this was actually true? Would you do things differently? Would you be more careful with what you attract? Would you choose more wisely when making decisions in all areas of your life? If we can grasp the concept that in some way we are responsible for everything that happens to us, then we have the power to attract anything we want into our lives. No matter what happens, no one is to blame for your failures and no one deserves the credit for your successes, except you. The real secret. Quote, "You get what you tolerate in life." Tony Robbins. One of the greatest lessons that I've learnt came when I discovered how the law of attraction really worked. Most people have seen The Secret and have some idea of it. While Rhonda Byrne did a fantastic job of bringing this information to the attention of the masses, most of what the law of attraction is really about was left out. The problem Rhonda faced was that if she wanted to accurately share the law of attraction, which was based on the teachings of Abraham Hicks, the movie would have gone for 2 days and not just 2 hours. When I talk to people about The Secret, the most common response I get is that they tried it and they think it's a load of crap. If they only did what was suggested in the movie or the book, then of course they would think that, because there was so much crucial information missing. When I talk about the difference between The Secret and the law of attraction, I explain that The Secret is like the trailer of a movie. It tells you what the film is about, but it doesn't give the entire story away. To fully understand how the law of attraction works, you must go a lot deeper than Rhonda Byrne went. I was fortunate to stumble upon the proper teachings of Abraham Hicks in 2007 and got a hold of the entire catalogue of audio by probably the world's foremost experts on the topic, Esther and Jerry Hicks. Apart from learning about how to use the teachings, the most important thing that I learned was that we are responsible in some way for everything that is in our lives. At that point in my life, this sounded way too far-fetched, just like I'm sure that as you hear this, you will think the same thing. Despite my belief that this could be true, I decided to have an open mind and suspend my judgment until I knew more. As I began thinking about this seemingly absurd philosophy, I started thinking about things that had happened in my life and if it could be at all true that I may have been responsible for them in some way. At the time, my Swedish girlfriend, who was living in my apartment in Surface, had just told me that she was going home to Sweden, and on that same day, the day before I had learnt this new information about the law of attraction, I had a major flood in my cruise ship cabin and lost thousands of dollars of sheet music. As I sat looking out over the Norwegian fjords, I realised that I had in fact been partly responsible for manifesting these things. I had spent so much mental energy agonising over a minor leak in the overhead pipes outside my cabin, and I had also been getting friendly with a female dancer on board. So yeah, it made sense that in some way I had been responsible for these events. Coincidence? Maybe, but stick with me. I began looking at other things, both good and bad, that had happened in my life, and sure enough, if I was honest enough, I was somehow responsible for those too. The key word in that last sentence is honest. Unless you're willing to be brutally honest with yourself and confront your darkest thoughts, you will never be able to grasp this concept. You will continue to make excuses and blame people and circumstances. Let's be clear here. There is a difference between something being your responsibility and it being your fault. I'm not suggesting that bad things that happen in your life are your fault. I am, however, saying that you are responsible in some way for them being in your life. This is going to take a little time to explain properly, so stick with me and please continue to suspend your judgment for the time being. As mentioned earlier, a woman is entitled to wear provocative clothing and walk down a dark alley at night. But that doesn't mean that nothing bad is going to happen to her. It's not her fault if someone attacks her or rapes her, but that doesn't negate her responsibility in the situation. She can't control what another person might do, but she can take steps to avoid the situation. That is the difference between something being your fault and it being your responsibility. In almost anything in life, the same applies. We can't control how people act, how the weather is, or how the stock market performs. What we can do is take responsibility for how we act, what we do, and how we place ourselves in these situations. This will dictate our experience in any given situation. In the teachings of Abraham Hicks, Esther and Jerry Hicks talk about co-creating. This is where we create with other people. For example, if you're driving along and have a car accident, you have co-created this with the other driver. It doesn't matter who is at fault. The accident would not have happened if both parties were not there at that exact moment. When you bump into someone who becomes your soulmate, this is also co-creating. The event that led to your meeting would not have occurred if you were both not present. You're probably thinking, well, that's chance, not co-creating. That's fine if you believe that everything in life is by chance. I, along with many people, believe that we manifest the circumstances in our lives by the most prominent thoughts that we hold. Have you ever been worried about falling over that it actually happened? Or have you ever focused so much on someone leaving you that they did? These are examples of the law of attraction and co-creating. If I asked you why you got a promotion at work or why you have a killer body, you would no doubt say that you were responsible for them. On the other hand, if I asked you why you're in a crappy relationship, I have no doubt that you would say that it's because the other person was a relationship retard. Trust me, that was my excuse once upon a time. We love to take credit for the good things in our lives, but quickly blame others or circumstances for the bad. The truth is that we are responsible for all of it. As I said a moment ago, it doesn't mean it's our fault or that we deserve it. It simply means that we have somehow manifested it in our lives, either by our most predominant thoughts and or actions, or by combining them with someone else and therefore co-creating. I know that this is not the easiest concept to grasp, but I promise that if you can accept it, your life will be completely different. Once you understand that you are responsible for everything in your life, then it is you who has the power to create only the things that you want. That's not to say that you won't screw up and create some shit, but if you understand that you are responsible for it, then you can look at how you created it and not do the same thing in the future. By blaming someone else for your situation, you are taking away your power. If you blame someone else, you might be able to remove yourself from the situation or behaviour, but you won't be able to remove the situation or behaviour from yourself. It will keep appearing until you take back the power and accept that you are in some way responsible for this behaviour showing up. you will then be empowered to make it disappear too. The real issue with domestic violence. Quote, "When you don't love yourself, that's when people can hurt you." Anonymous. Now that you've hopefully got a grasp on how you may have created things in your life, let's look at how this pertains to domestic violence. Those who don't yet grasp this concept may say, how is a woman responsible for a man hitting her? The answer to this and similar situations where there are what people call a victim is varied depending on the situation. But let me provide this school of thought. Once again, we must differentiate between fault and responsibility. Before I make this point, I want to be clear. I'm providing this information not to blame anyone, but rather to provide them with the tools to avoid these types of situations. In the specific example of domestic violence, or violence of any kind, such as rape, there will always be extreme examples where no matter what a woman does, a man is going to be violent towards her. These ideas are not going to eliminate every single case, but they will go a long way to avoiding them in many cases. In the case of violence in a relationship, at some point both people meet and liked each other and things were probably fine. This first meeting and deciding to form a relationship is co-creating. It didn't happen with just one person. From the point of view of the victim, she, I'm generalising that the female is the victim for this example, chooses her partner. The woman had the opportunity to not engage in a relationship with him. Perhaps her radar was off so far as spotting the red flags that he may have had, or maybe he was good at hiding them. Either way, the relationship began. Over time, the partner may have displayed qualities that the female didn't like, but she chose to ignore them for whatever reason. These qualities may have worsened in nature, or perhaps the female may have acted in ways that were also not good for creating a loving relationship. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is anyone's fault. The point is to illustrate how we could possibly have co-created the final outcome. Perhaps as the relationship grew, so did the jealousy and abuse. The female may have felt that she couldn't leave, or maybe thought that her partner might change. If the female ignored her partner's abuse, there is every chance that he may have continued to use this tactic and more than likely increase the frequency or level of abuse to get what he wanted. Long story short, throughout a relationship, there are many choices that both parties have made. This begins with the very first encounter right up until a relationship becomes what we would refer to as domestic violence. While the final act of physical or emotional abuse is not excusable in any way, if we look back over the timeline, we see that the end result is a product of many choices and co-created scenarios. I know that it is often hard to leave a partner, especially one where your life is in danger or children are involved. My point is that by understanding how we all created everything in our lives, we then have the power to stop these situations from happening before it gets to that point. This chapter, and in fact this entire book, is about empowering people so that we can prevent violence of any kind, but most importantly, in intimate relationships. Just like cancer, there is so much focus on treatment, but hardly any on prevention. We will never stop domestic violence by making punishments harsher. We will only reduce it or stop it by implementing preventative measures. This means going right back to how we educate children on real subjects like co-creating, self-esteem, and respect. The so-called fight against domestic violence has it all wrong. Instead of talking about the real issue, which is how we are all acting, we are simply saying that a man should not hit a woman. Of course he shouldn't. The problem is that in intimate relationships, emotions take over and both men and women act in ways that create anger in a relationship instead of love. There is no excuse for violence of any kind in any relationship, and no matter what a woman does or says to a man, he should never be violent. But let's be brutally honest, some women are not helping their cases. Like I said earlier, there will always be cases where no matter what a woman does, a man will be violent. That stems from his own issues and may never change, no matter how wonderful his partner is. However, instead of trying to band-aid the solution by saying don't hit a woman, we need to go much deeper and look at how we treat each other in an attempt to avoid getting to the point where anyone would be that violent. Instead of fighting domestic violence, let's create love. As per the law of attraction, we create what we focus on, whether we want it or not. When we focus on what we don't want, all that does is attract more of what we don't want. It therefore makes sense that if we want to stop domestic violence, then we need to focus on the opposite of what we don't want, and that is loving and peaceful relationships. In my opinion, we need to come from a place of love and compassion, not anger and hatred. It's like when I did 3 days of intensive firefighting training in the UK before one of my cruise ship contracts. The first thing that we learnt was that a fire needs 3 elements to survive: heat, fuel, and oxygen. If we take one or more of these elements away, the fire goes out. You don't see firefighters throwing more fuel, such as timber, on a fire that they want to extinguish. You don't see them with big fans blowing oxygen onto the fire either. They remove fuel where possible, or try to reduce the heat with water or smother the flames. Domestic violence is the same. As a society, we're fueling the fire by making men feel like it's all their fault and women play no part whatsoever in the lead-up. The final act of violence that gets the most attention is the man's fault because we have the choice to react or not react to our partner's actions, if she said or did something. But as previously stated, there is usually a lot before this event that we need to change if we're serious about stamping out domestic violence. As I said a moment ago, we are failing to stop domestic violence because we are treating it the same way as the world treats cancer. Cancer will never be cured when all we do is detect and treat cancer once it's in a person's body. There is no money in finding out why cancer is caused, so therefore this disease will never be stopped until we go back and look at the causes and not just detection and treatment. Detection and treatment are helping, but that's not the problem. Finding out why people get cancer is where the focus should be. The same thing is happening with domestic violence. We are focusing on detecting it and punishing offenders when we should also be looking further into why this happens and how we can help men and women in preventing relationships from getting to the point where they become violent. The stigma of blaming men without finding out what causes this has to be putting pressure on men, which would in turn surely have them in such a built-up state that they may react instead of having control. We need to take a step back from all the blaming and look at this from a place of love and compassion, rather than hatred and blame. So far as the oxygen part of this analogy, the media are giving the situation far too much of the wrong type of oxygen. Yes, we need to be having the conversation, but the media want to constantly play the man-bashing and negative card in order to boost ratings. This is just creating more anger among men and women, and it isn't helping at all. If the media were serious about their claims of being for the best interests of the public, like many outlets proclaim, then they would change their approach. Lastly, the best way to reduce violence in any situation is to give it love. Corny sounding, I know, but nonetheless true. Like the fire, remove the heat and it goes out. As St. Francis of Assisi said, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love." In other words, give love to hatred and hatred disappears. It is only in rare circumstances that you can have a fight with someone who is not fighting back. The more often we give love in the face of anger or simply walk away, the faster violence will be extinguished. The natural instinct of men and women is to stand up for themselves and to give as good as they get. As I said earlier, we seem to think that it is better to be right than be happy. I'm not suggesting that you should cop abuse or not stand up for your safety, but what is more important, to be right or to be happy? In a nutshell, when it comes to domestic violence and bullying, we are coming at it from the wrong angle. When you're in the ring with Mike Tyson, you don't stand toe-to-toe with him. Trying to fight violence with violence or standing up and fighting bullies will never work. The best way to approach it is to worry less about the opponent and more about yourself. When you focus on violence, you attract violence. When you focus on love, you attract love. In a relationship, when you spend your time on what the other person is or isn't doing, you're not spending enough time on worrying about what you're doing to improve the relationship. When two people are focusing on the other person's faults or how little the other person is giving or contributing, then the relationship breaks down. When you worry more about how you can give to the relationship, it will thrive. As Mother Teresa famously said when she was asked if she would march against war, "If you have a march for peace, then I'm in." Instead of being against domestic violence, why not be for loving and nurturing relationships? My gift to you. The answer to stopping domestic violence. Quote, "We don't get rid of darkness by hitting it with a baseball bat. We only get rid of darkness by turning on the light." Marianne Williamson. Having spent many years wondering what went wrong in relationships and being on the wrong side of a violent relationship in Canada, it finally dawned on me recently where we're going wrong with stemming the incidence of domestic violence. Many so-called experts, authorities, practitioners and powers that be have all used their so-called wisdom and power to come up with what I believe is a big steaming pile of crap when it comes to how they think domestic violence can be stopped. We also have the Me Too movement that is disempowering women by making them all out to be victims instead of empowering women to make better choices. We have the media campaigns stating that a man shouldn't hit a woman and telling men to pull their mates into line if they act violently towards a woman. But all of these things are missing the mark by a long way. The most astounding thing that I learnt from reading over 1,500 books in recent years is that the most complex of problems can always be solved by the simplest of solutions. I read a quote in a book that was as follows: "All the water of all the oceans in the world cannot sink a ship, unless the water is let in." My interpretation of this is that the entire world can hate me all they like, but because I choose not to let their hate in, they can never affect me. This is at the core of how I believe we can reduce domestic violence dramatically. Let me preface what I'm about to say by stating that this concept applies to how others treat you, how you treat others, and most importantly, how you treat yourself. The only reason someone would act violently towards another person is because they are scared, feel threatened, or vulnerable. The main reason why anyone would feel these feelings is from not loving themselves. When we don't love ourselves, we let the water in, which sinks our ship, our relationship. My two kelpies will run around and be the friendliest mutts when they know they are safe. But if I have them held tightly on a lead around a bigger dog, my kelpies will go ballistic. They are beautifully natured dogs, but when they feel threatened, they lash out. Humans are the same. We are all nice people for the most part, but when our ego takes over, we feel anxious or threatened, we will instinctively lash out physically or verbally to protect our ego. When my dogs are at home, they feel safe, but outside my home, they are naturally anxious, and this can lead to aggression. My job is to make sure they always feel safe. I choose environments that encourage calmness for them. Humans need to do the same thing. Embarking on relationships that make us feel anxious or unloved may cause us or our partner to lash out. Keep in mind, though, that this will only occur if we let ourselves feel this way. This often occurs when we have self-doubt. This may sound strange, but selecting the right partner is half the battle. The other half is nothing more than self-love. Love each other and love yourself. It's that fucking simple. Take full responsibility for your actions and the situation instead of blaming your partner. I'm not talking about the physical or psychological act of domestic violence. I'm talking about what creates a situation where two people may treat each other badly. Society wants us to focus on the act of abuse when we should be focusing on what causes it. When you love yourself and have love in your heart, you will be less likely to attract someone with hatred or anger in their heart. That is the starting point. If you have low self-esteem, you are more likely to attract people into your life who might be more inclined to be violent. I know this to be the case when I attracted violence into my life in 2004. At the time of meeting my Canadian ex in Tahiti, I was insecure and not loving myself as I should have. With this being the case, when she showed me the type of love and attention that I was not giving myself, I fell for her, while subconsciously ignoring all of the signs of her aggression and emotionally violent personality. That said, I'm sure she can be a wonderful person, and in fact I saw how awesome she was as well. We all have both sides. However, in hindsight, I could see that she too was insecure, and the combination of neither of us providing ourselves with the love we needed led us to be looking for it in each other, and eventually lashing out at each other. This is what I was talking about earlier in relation to co-creating and everything being your responsibility. From my point of view, if I was emotionally stronger as I am these days, there is no way that I would have attracted her into my life. I would not have pursued a relationship, and therefore I would not have been in a situation where she could have been emotionally and then physically violent towards me in Canada. Like attracts like. Water seeks its own level. If you're attracting certain things into your life that you don't like, it is because the same trait is lurking disowned somewhere inside of you. Even if I had started a relationship with my ex while loving myself more, I would not have accepted such behaviour for very long. Notice that I'm not blaming her. I'm putting the onus on me and that gives me the power to understand my part in attracting the violence so that I cannot attract it into my life in the future. It's not about saying your partner was an ass, but rather that you missed an opportunity to not put yourself into that situation. When you blame others, you take away your power, but when you take full responsibility for everything you attract in your life, then you give yourself all the power. I get that not everyone will embrace this way of living, and there will always be some level of violence in some people's lives, but that doesn't mean it has to be a part of yours. We often rely on other people to make us feel good, and if they don't, we feel hurt. At the end of the day, it's not our partner's responsibility to make us feel good. It is ours. I know this to be a fact from my own experience. If you love yourself and your partner loves themselves, then you heighten each other's happiness rather than rely on it from each other. If you rely on someone else for you to be happy, then inevitably there will come a time when you are let down. If you love yourself as well as them, and they love themselves as well as you, then I'm 100% certain that there won't be any form of domestic violence in your relationship. Yes, I know it's not necessarily that easy. It is that simple, but not that easy when you're dealing with millions of people. My point here is that we need to educate the whole of society that these are the changes that we need to make. If we do this and the collective consciousness moves in that direction, domestic violence will decrease. If we love each other in general, then this will breed more love in other areas. We need to love everyone and, most importantly, love ourselves. As I've previously stated, fighting fire with fire only creates more fire. As the quote at the beginning of this chapter says, we only get rid of darkness by turning on the light. We will never get rid of domestic violence in our lives by fighting it. When we learn to love ourselves and turn on the light, the darkness of domestic violence will disappear. At a time where the world needs men to stand up in these areas to protect women and children, men are too afraid to do so for fear of accusations of untoward behaviour. Many men would also rather avoid dating than risk being accused of rape or sexual assault at the first sign of a fling or sexual encounter going pear-shaped. It's the saddest statement to make, but nonetheless, it's true. While I'm not playing the blame game or defending any man who was violent towards a partner, for every abusive man, there is also a woman somewhere who is treating a man in a different, but somewhat still horrible way. Women can be just as emotionally abusive or use sex or money as a way to manipulate a partner as a man can. Unfortunately, this type of behaviour is not made public or scrutinised by the media as much. This is why we need to change the narrative around domestic violence. We can argue all day about who treats who worse, but until both sexes accept responsibility for issues and violence in a relationship, then it won't end. With all sincerity, I hope that comment offends people and pisses them off, because maybe then both men and women will take a good hard look at themselves and stop blaming each other and start taking positive steps towards treating each other better in relationships. When I sat through a men's domestic violence program in 2015, almost every single man there came up with excuses for why he was violent towards his partner. Excuses like, the bitch fucked another guy, or the slut spent all my money and smoked all my drugs. I lost count of how many times I stepped in and said to one of them, mate, it doesn't matter what she did. What matters is how you reacted to it. I get what they're saying, and I feel for them. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anyone does to you. The only thing that matters is how you act or react to what they do. We are all human, and partners can do things that hurt like fucking hell, but you still have control over your actions. I've had partners who have done some horrific things in our relationships. That doesn't matter. All that matters is how I react to it. When men and women start accepting responsibility for how they treat themselves and take charge of their own self-esteem, this will directly reflect on how they treat their partners. When we rely on someone else to prop up our self-esteem, we are certain to have it fall sooner or later. I'm not saying it's a perfect strategy that will always stop violence in every situation, but I'm certain that it's a better solution than has been put forward thus far by authorities who should know a lot better than me. Every time a woman dies at the hands of a partner, people cry out for harsher penalties for offenders, like that would solve anything. That's like saying you should close the stable gate after the horse has already bolted. For far too long, the focus has been on punishment instead of what causes a relationship to get to this level of anger and what, for the purposes of this discussion, leads a man to be violent towards his partner. If I seem to be repeating myself, that is because it needs to be repeated over and over until someone in power or the collective consciousness understands that we will never stop domestic violence until we identify and rectify what causes people to get to a point where they feel they have no other option but to act with violence. For too long, the only mindset we have had is the mindset that if someone offends, then we need to lock them up. I agree that in some cases this is the best option, but what if we put more energy into education, support, and help for both men and women? Plus, having spent time in custody recently, I can tell you that 70% of male offenders in Queensland prisons are there for domestic violence-related matters. Now tell me, have domestic violence numbers ever decreased in the past decade? Any idiot can answer that question and see that we're going about it the wrong way. We need to create a network where couples can work through issues individually or collectively when the issues are minor. That way things don't escalate to the point where someone dies and someone else ends up in jail. Authorities and police will try to argue that there are already support networks for men in this area, but I can tell you that they are a complete pile of steaming crap. The officers who claim to be there for the males spend more time harassing the men and trying to compile information to use against them. Yet they wonder why men are not willing to use these services. The whole situation is counterproductive and a waste of taxpayers' money. Instead of the only solution being that we demonise men, what if we went further back and made communication a subject at primary school? Most agree that the education system is not as relevant as it was 50 years ago and needs to be overhauled. English and maths are important, but so is teaching kids finance and how to treat each other and themselves. My girlfriend Nikki, who was 20 when I was finishing high school, told me that I'd learn more in the first 3 years after school than I did in 12 years at school. Guess what? She was spot on. School didn't teach me discipline, self-esteem, how to create real wealth, or how to have supportive relationships free of insecurities and violence. I know we can't teach everything in school, but if we get rid of some of the irrelevant subjects and give students real-life skills, then I bet the rates of suicide, poverty, and domestic violence decrease dramatically by the time their generation is running the world. Some might say it's a parent's job to educate the children in these areas. The problem with that theory is that many parents weren't taught these things in the first place. How can an adult teach a child something that they themselves were never correctly taught? These problems will take a generation to be fully corrected, but we need to start somewhere and do it the right way, instead of band-aiding the problem with short-term solutions that cure nothing. Not all gifts can be taken back. As Buddha once said after receiving criticism and negativity from one of his critics, if someone offers you a gift and you don't accept it, to whom does the gift belong? In other words, if someone belittles you, criticises you, or projects anger towards you and you don't accept it, where does it go? In my opinion, it returns to the person who is trying to give it to you. Or, as Dr. Wayne Dyer adds, why would you accept something that belongs to someone else that is not yours? If someone offers you the gift of criticism or hateful words or actions, simply don't accept it. That way it will not only have little effect on you, but it will remain with them. For years, Brianna's family have tried their best to hurt, bully, defame, harass, and project anger my way. But because I have never accepted it, it sits with them. They own it. They're holding on to it. They are carrying all of these feelings around, and it is them who are suffering from it, not me. I'm not affected by their anger. I'm not having gut-wrenching feelings or stress and anxiety over their hatred. They are. It's like Tony Robbins always says, hating someone is like drinking poison and expecting them to die. If those people who are living their lives with so much hate knew anything about how cancer is allowed to develop and survive in our bodies, they would not be holding on to such hate and venom. They are creating the perfect environment in their bodies for cancers and diseases to develop. Why would anyone want to do that to themselves? The same goes for the media and online trolls. For either of them to affect me, 3 things have to occur. 1, I have to turn on the news or go on social media, which I refuse to do. 2, I have to read or listen to what they say, which I won't. And 3, I have to let what is said affect me, which will never happen. If you've noticed, in all 3 cases, for anything to affect me, it comes down to my actions and not the actions of someone else. That is essentially what this book is about. Whether you're talking about suicide, bullying, or domestic violence, it all comes down to how you react to anything that happens in life. It doesn't matter what anyone says or does. It only matters how you react or let yourself feel about what someone else says or does. I'm going to repeat that last sentence because if you remember only one line in this book, this is the one. It only matters how you react or let yourself feel about what someone else says or does that counts. From a man's point of view, it doesn't matter if your wife spends all your money, won't give you sex, nags you constantly, belittles you in front of your children and friends, or does anything else to you. It only matters how you react. Whether it be that someone is harassing you at work, bullying you online or at school, or showing much anger towards you in a relationship. These things can only hurt you if you let them. This is not to say that this process is easy. It will take practice, but I promise you that your life will change when you follow through with this simple yet effective concept. In the case of domestic violence, if you don't accept these so-called gifts from your partner from the beginning, then it won't get to the level of physical or emotional abuse that we see in many cases before the courts and in the media. If you're not accepting their anger and hatred, etc., then you will act in a different way than that of someone who is fighting domestic violence. Instead of fighting it, you will more than likely walk away, resolve it, or not attract it into your relationship or life in the first place. It is only when you don't love yourself that someone else can hurt you. If you truly love yourself, then there is no way you would accept or tolerate anything less than complete love in a relationship. No ifs or buts. This is fact. How do I know? I've done it myself. I have been in relationships where I didn't love myself and I spent the entire time letting them treat me badly. Why would I do that? Because I was so desperate to be loved that I would turn a blind eye to how badly they were treating me. It's like having a puppy or a small child. The puppy or child will play up because even though they get in trouble, the attention we give them when they play up is better than no attention at all. As humans, we would subconsciously prefer bad love to the feeling of having no love at all. If I loved myself during those bad relationships, there is no way known that I would have tolerated their behaviour. Sure, I thought I wasn't tolerating it, but all I was really doing was making it worse by fighting with them, instead of walking away out of respect for myself.